Okay, so the topic for today, as you can see, is taking charge of life. Because as I'm sure you have, I've received too many calls, people who feel like that life has taken over them, that coronavirus and the social upheaval that we're all experiencing everywhere has taken over our culture, our society, but more personally, even our own positive mindset, our own moods, our own feelings. And therefore, I want to go really to the root of what Judaism says about how we can take charge of our life, or retake charge of our life, so that we live it in the most meaningful and purposeful way. Now, I think there's no coincidence that we are right now experiencing the summer. The summer is a time where great things happen in history, but it's also a time where very negative things happen in history. That's why, for example, the period of the 3 weeks in Judaism, that period of mourning that really mourns the destruction of the temple and all of the events that led to it, occur in the summer. That's one of the terrible things, you know, according to historians, by the way, most wars, and you can trace that yourselves if you'd like to, if you have some spare time, most wars of history started when? In the summer. The Holocaust started in the summer, September 1st, 1939. Now, why? Because the summer is usually a time, and I'm not going to go there, but I just for the sake of the historical background, the historians explain that the summer is usually a time of tremendous freedom that can lead to chaos. And it's also a time of tremendous boredom, and boredom also leads to chaos. When you're bored, you start doing stupid things, and you start searching for fantasies and things that excite you. So therefore, many wars, perhaps, that's why many wars began during the summer. But there is a summer story, a story that occurred, in other words, in the summer, that I'd like to focus on today. Speaking of the destruction of the temple, that which we'll be mourning about in just about 3 weeks from today. You know, the period of those 3 weeks begin in 3 weeks on the 17th of Tammuz. And that story of the destruction of the second temple really can be rooted in just one individual story that occurred in Jerusalem of the day. This is now in the year 66, something like that, 65, 66 CE. This is a famous story, but I want to read the words of the Talmud that depicts the story in a very powerful way. Does anyone, by the way, want to read? I don't want to be the only one speaking. So does anyone want to read the first reference that takes us to this summer story? Anyone?
I will.
Okay,
Okay,
please. Thank you,
Babylonian Talmud. The temple was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, for there was a certain individual who was friendly with Kamsa, but who was an enemy of a man named Bar Kamsa. He made a feast and said to his servant, "Go and bring Kamsa, my friend, to my feast." But the servant brought Bar Kamsa, the enemy, instead. The one who made the feast found Bar Kamsa, his sworn enemy, seated there. He said to him, "Since you are my enemy, what are you doing here? Get up and get out." Bar Kamsa said, "Since I'm here already, let me stay and I will pay you for what I eat and drink." The host responded, "No, I will pay for half the cost of the feast." His enemy, Bar Kamsa, said, "No, I will pay the entire cost of the feast." "No." And he seized Bar Kamsa, stood him up, and threw him out. Bar Kamsa thought, since the rabbis were there, saw the whole thing, and did not protest, obviously they had no objection to my embarrassment. I'll go now and slander them to the king. Bar Kamsa, the enemy, was thrown out of the party, went to the Caesar, and declared, "The Jews have rebelled against you."
Right. Okay, this is the story. We'll see exactly how it evolved thereafter. But it's a story that I think shouts inactivity, or perhaps even indecisiveness and indifference. It is amazing to me that there were so many people at this party seeing someone, Bar Kamsa, being humiliated by the host. And yes, I understand he was the host. He was the one who invited everyone, and therefore the one maybe in charge, the leader of that party. But still, Can no one stand up for this bar kamsa who's being butchered, humiliated by the host? No one, not only the sages. I would go as far as saying even further than what the Talmud says, that no participant stood up for bar kamsa. At least there's no record of that. Now, just imagine being in that situation, right? Imagine being the host, or imagine being an invitee at that party. You are there and you are witnessing the scene. What do? Will you stand up for this bar kamsa and risk, yes, tearing and even affecting long-term your relationship with the host, someone who apparently was also, dignified and someone who belonged to the high echelon of society, according to the Talmud elsewhere too? Would you risk, again, hurting your relationship? Or would you remain silent? Would you say, maybe it's not the time, let me look the other way, let me go to a different corner as if I didn't notice anything? What would you do? Now, that's one question. Another question is, if you're the host himself, you see your enemy, and fine, you understand, he wasn't invited. Do you kick him out? And what if you say, yes, you kick him out, and then he offers to pay for half of the party or the whole party? Say I'm having a bar mitzvah, and someone comes that I didn't want, and I say to him, hey, please leave. What I personally would not do, but I would say to him, please leave. And then he says, you know what, just let me stay. I'm embarrassed if I leave now. I'll pay for your whole bar mitzvah. I would say, of course, stay. You pay for my whole bar mitzvah. I don't care if you're my enemy or not. Stay. But here you see an indifference from all directions. Indifference from the invitees, an indifference again from the host himself, who's completely indifferent to the plea of his enemy. Let me stay. I don't want to be embarrassed. I'll pay for everything. And that indifference is what eventually led to the destruction of the Second Temple. Now, why am I thinking of this story? Not just because it's a summer story, but I think it's because it speaks to our day and age at this very time, at the times that we are living right now, and also speaks, I think, to one of the great truths of Judaism, that, as Albert Einstein famously put it, evil happens not because of evil people executing it, but because of good people who stand by and say nothing. We are experiencing a lot of evil. We're also experiencing a lot of broken fragments in our society, maybe a lot of suffering, a lot of pain. And I think at times like these, we have to learn from a story like this and say, no, we're not going to succumb to indifference. We're not going to succumb to silence. We're going to stand up for the right ideals. We're going to fight for justice. We're going to stand up for the truth. That's what the story shouts. And now there are so many opportunities. You know, we give the excuse very often that we're in quarantine, we're kind of stuck at home, we're living in our own world. But I have to say, there are so many, to me it hurts seeing this, but there are so many opportunities where even if you're in quarantine, even if you're social distancing, even if you're following all the guidelines like you should, there are so many opportunities to attend to the pain of people. Pain because of the COVID-19, pain because of the social upheaval, pain because just of the general mood that they're in. There's so many different opportunities. We live in a broken world, perhaps more broken than ever. And it is our duty to learn from the story, from the summer stories, particularly in the summer, when we apparently have more liberty, more freedom, more time to do that which we can. And therefore, we must stand up for God in this world, for anything good. We must be his ambassadors of light. This is the time. Now is our calling. Today is our vocation. You know, I'm reminded of the story I just read about her, and I was just so moved. But there's a guy by the name of Philip Muller. I don't know if anyone has heard of him, but he was what's called a Sonderkommando at Auschwitz, a Jewish man who was forced by the Nazis, like all other Sonderkommandos, to clean up all the bodies at Auschwitz after they were gassed to death. And of course, his life was threatened, that if he wouldn't follow the orders, he would be killed himself. And he did that for 3 years at Auschwitz. After Auschwitz, he wrote a book. I forget the title of the book, but it's something like being 3 years as a Sonderkommando at Auschwitz, something like that. You can Google him, you'll find his name, Philip Muller. In that book, he writes the story of Francesca Mann, a Jewish lady who apparently before the war was one of the great ballet dancers of Europe. She had come from Warsaw. She had won all the competitions she could win. She had attended just before the war in 1938 in an international competition in Brussels, and I think had won. And she was really on her way to becoming perhaps one of the greatest dancers, certainly of Poland, but maybe of the world and maybe of history. And then the war came. She, as a Jew, was sent to the Warsaw Ghetto and then to Bergen-Belsen. And then from Bergen-Belsen, she was sent in October of 1943 with some 2,000 Jews to Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, she was called to the, I think it was to the left, right? Those people who were sentenced to death by the angel of death, Mengele, were called to go to the left. Anyway, she didn't stand a chance. She was a woman and she was weak by then. And immediately they told her, no, we have no work for you here. You'll go to the left, which meant you'll be gassed. A few days later, she walked into the gas chamber and she sees all these Nazis watching them undress and preparing for their death. And she says to herself, I'm sharing with you the story again, just because I read it a few days ago, and I think it shouts this lesson too. And she says, you know what? I'm not going to go to death so silently. I'm going to use every skill I have, including my dancing skill, to fight for the Jewish people. Even though maybe I stand no chance, still at this moment, especially when I'm about to die, I'm not going to go down silently. And she started dancing in a very seductive way, and the Nazis were all confused. Why is she doing this? And she took advantage of the confusion, immediately took her shoe and threw it on one of the Nazis. He fell to the floor. She grabbed his gun and she shot him to death. And then she started pointing a gun to the other Nazis, shot and injured quite a few of them. This is all in the gas chamber. Just imagine a woman by Francesca Mann. Again, you can Google her story. The Nazis came, Rudolf Hess, who was there, I think it was, came and decided to reimpose the order in the gas chamber, and he shot all of these ladies to death, and those that were left were then gassed to death. But here is a woman who knew she stood no chance, yet she said, I'm not going to sin the sin of the host of Bar Kamsa in that party. I'm not going to sin the sin of those rabbis and those invitees. I'm not going to be indifferent when evil happens. And yes, I stand no chance, but I'm still going to stand for truth. I'm still going to stand for my people. I'm still going to stand for all that is good under the sun. And she does that. And this was recorded by this man, Philip Muller, who was a Sonderkommando at Auschwitz, who wrote about this story, a story that continues to inspire, including me, so many people around the world to again have that courage, have that faith, that whether we stand a chance or not, we must become the voice to the voiceless. We must stand for truth when falsehood and evil happen. And yes, we must reach out to all those in pain and offer them portions of our goodness and of our kindness. That, I think, is one way of taking charge of life, becoming God's instruments of light to the world, especially when everyone around us is silent. Indecisiveness or indifference versus true Jewish resolution. Number two, second way to take charge of our lives, I learned from the continuation of this story. So Bar Kamsa, now all hurt and insulted, he said, what these rabbis didn't stand for me, I'm going to go, like we just read, to Caesar and declare that the Jews have rebelled against you. Let's see what happens. Does the Roman Caesar believe him? Let's continue the story. Does anyone want to read? And from this continuation of the story, I want to draw a second lesson. Anyone?
I'll read if you want.
Go for it, Judy, please.
The Roman Caesar demanded proof for this assertion. So Bar Kokhba told the Caesar, send them an offering to sacrifice on their altar in the temple and see if they are ready to sacrifice it. The Caesar agreed and sent a choice calf with this Jew, requesting that it be offered on the altar in the holy temple. The Jew, Bar Kokhba, went ahead and blemished the animal, rendering it unfit for sacrifice in the holy temple. The rabbis considered offering it anyhow to maintain peace with the Roman Caesar. One very respected sage, Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkilos, agreed against this. His logic was that people... Pardon?
Continue. Sorry, let me mute all. And then go for it. Go, continue. Go.
His logic was that people will misinterpret this and say that blemished animals are suitable to be offered on the altar. The rabbis then considered killing the plotting messenger Bar Kamsa, who was clearly a dangerous informer and could cause a full blow up in what was already a volatile situation, plunging the region into war. By killing him, he would not be able to report to Rome that the offering was rejected. Again, Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkilos argued against this, saying that people will misinterpret this and say that one who blemishes a sacrifice is deserving of the death penalty. As a result, they did nothing. The offering was not sacrificed, and the Roman war against the Jews ensued with full force. After a long siege, Vespasian burnt the temple, destroyed Jerusalem, murdered untold numbers of Jews, and exiled the survivors. Regarding this incident, the great Talmudic sage Rabbi Yochanan remarked, "The humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkilos destroyed our home, burnt our temple, and exiled us from our land."
Right. Okay, so there are two things now that led to the destruction of the temple. Or in general, if we were to look at this story in a deeper way, in a more personal way, there are two things in general that lead to destruction. One is this inability to stand up for truth, this indifference, as we said, and that's the first way to take charge of our life, to act in the opposite way, to stand up for truth and to be empathetic and engaged with our surroundings. And number two, it's the continuation of this story. And that's Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkilos, who was a man who was as narrow-minded as it gets. I don't know if there's another adjective to use here, but all he could see is, well, oh, what's the law? What about the big picture? Or as they call it in German/English, the Weltanschauung. What happened to seeing what the future? You know, the Mishnah asks the question of who is wise, and one of the answers, and by the way, according to that, you can figure out whether you are wise or not, but the Mishnah says, who is wise? One is able to see the future, or to tell the future. In other words, the person who is wise is someone who's able to see the consequences of his or her actions. Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkilos is not looking at the big picture. He's not acting wisely. He's not seeing what will happen. Fine. Yes, maybe I have to break the law here a little bit, but we have to look at the big picture. Maybe it's worth breaking the law, because then we'll be putting thousands and thousands of Jews in danger. Then the Roman emperor will come and destroy a temple, destroy a nation. So maybe it's worth overlooking this little law now and attending to that which is truly important. You know, I'll tell you this, speaking of the wise, and I've mentioned this, I think, in the past, but one of the greatest pieces of advice I received from my own mentor, from Rabbi Dean Steinsaltz, world scholar, he once asked me, hey, do you know what the difference is between a wise man and a fool? And I said, no. So he responded, he said, look, it's very easy. The wise man makes the important important and the trivial trivial. The fool makes the important trivial and the trivial important. Powerful and profound words. But I think it's words that apply here to Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkilos, who said, well, maybe we won't offer the sacrifice because the law says that you're not allowed to offer a blemished sacrifice. But he doesn't understand that if you don't sacrifice it now, Vespasian will launch a war against you. Make the important important. That's what's important. The life of thousands of Jews is what is important, not the trivial part of offering or not a blemished sacrifice. Be wise, make the important important. That happens in our own lives. Sometimes we make the trivial important. Someone insults us. Okay, so someone said something not nice to us, and we get so stuck in that insult that we forget to look at the big picture. Well, when we look at let's look maybe at their intentions, and even if their intentions were not so good, how about the general relationship? How about the effect that me now divorcing myself from this person because of that little insult? How about the effect that will have? And it happens in so many different ways. Someone cuts me. I drive on the street and someone cuts me. Am I going to go crazy now because someone cut me? It's a little detail. What's important is that right now I'm driving to my destination and I'm able to stop and smell the roses along the way. That's what's important. I'm going to get stuck with those little details. Now, it's true on a very personal level like this, but I think it's true also on a social level, maybe on a national level. And that is that things are happening, and whether it's the pandemic, whether again it's a social upheaval, or whether it's people in pain, and we have to be able to look at the greater picture and say, well, 1 second, where am I devoting my life? Am I right now spending my days with little details, or am I being able to relate really to the big picture and overcome the little details of life in order to attend to that which is truly important, in order to really be wise? And we get so stuck sometimes. And by the way, it happens on so many levels in so many areas. There's a great story that Hasidic Jews like to tell about the stringency that sometimes occurs in the Jewish world, the stringency that is portrayed here by Rabbi Allouche. It's a terrible story, but it's a story that makes the point very strongly. The story about a man who was so-called super religious, ultra orthodox, you may call him, and a poor man came knocking on his door and says, please, please give me something to eat. I'm dying. If I don't eat now, I'm going to die. Now the man, the ultra religious guy, didn't like giving charity, and he was as stingy as it gets. What does he do? He goes to his fridge, he finds a rotten piece of fish and gives it to the man. The man eats the rotten piece of fish, but because it was so rotten, he dies from it. Fine, he dies from it. He says to himself, gosh, now I have to go to the funeral, perform that mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to escort the dead. So let me find out when the funeral is. The next day he goes to the funeral, escorts the dead. Thereafter he goes to the house of mourners to comfort the mourners because he thinks that's a mitzvah, and he comes back home with a very big smile. And his wife tells him, why are you so happy today? I've never seen you as happy, as shining as you are today. And he says to her, what do you mean? Why am I so happy? Because I performed 3 mitzvahs, 3 very good deeds. 1, I gave food to the poor. 2, I escorted the dead. 3, I comforted the mourners. That's why I'm so happy. Now, Hasidic Jews like to tell the story maybe to bash others because they stand for joy and they stand for really seeing the big picture. But again, it reminds us of us sometimes we are so caught into the little details of life, whether it's in religion or not, that we forget to see the big picture. Where's the empathy? Where's the heart? Where's the ability to see the future? Where's that capability to see the consequences of our actions, or maybe even to look at the general picture of human beings and attend to them in their terms, in their pain? You know, just another story that comes to mind. But speaking of Rabbi Allouche, and I think that's again tool number 2 to take charge of our lives, and then we'll go to point number 3. But this is a story about Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank, who was the chief rabbi of Jerusalem some 80 years ago. He happens to be, by the way, the father-in-law of Rabbi Lau. Maybe many of you have heard of Rabbi Israel Lau, who was the chief rabbi of Israel until not long ago. His son today is the current chief rabbi. But the father-in-law of Rabbi Lau is this rabbi of Jerusalem, Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank. And one day he was sitting in his study, and a 7-year-old daughter comes to his study with a question. She was holding 1 egg in her hand, and she says to the rabbi, look, I just came from Talpiot, which is the other side of the city, to ask you whether I can eat this egg, because there's a blood spot on the yellow of the egg. And what I learned, the 7-year-old girl says to the rabbi, is that when there's a blood spot on the yellow part of the egg, we can't eat the egg, we have to throw it away. If it's on the white spot, but on the white side, by the way, then you can just cut it off and then eat the rest of the egg. But if it's in the yellow, then you have to throw away the egg. Rabbi looks at her and then says to her almost immediately, yes, you can eat the egg, don't you worry. Fine, she leaves, and then the students of this rabbi, Rabbi Frank, say to him, didn't you teach us that an egg like this is to be thrown away? It had blood in the yellow. The halacha says very clearly, you have to throw it away. And the rabbi says, one second. You didn't see this girl? She came barefoot from the other side of the city, not with a dozen eggs, with just 1 egg in her hand. Doesn't that tell you that she lives in utter poverty, that maybe she's dependent on that egg for her only meal of the day? In cases like this, of course, you should permit the egg. Shame, her life, Her health is much more important than this halacha. And that's the ability, again, to see the greater picture, to empathize in a way that we become one with the other. It's not about our narrow-mindedness, the way we see things. It's about the way others see things and our ability to see that vision of others. That's number two. So tool number one to take charge of our lives, to go back, is to be able to stand for truth, to reach out to someone in pain, even, yes, when it's uncomfortable. Tool number two is to be able to see the big picture, to focus on that which is important in life, not that which is trivial. Yes, a lot of trivial things, especially in quarantine, are getting to us, and we get agitated by any stupid little thing. But let's keep our eyes on the big picture, on what is important, on our greater calling of life, on that purpose for which we were created. That's number two. And number three now goes to the other side of the story, again, the summer story. All this happened in the summer of the year 66 CE. And eventually that story of Kamsa that led to the Roman siege of Jerusalem led to the destruction of the temple in the year 70 CE. Let's read now what happened in that summer of 70 CE and draw yet a third lesson on how to take charge of our lives from this story. Does anyone want to read? This is now about the destruction of the temple and something that Rabbi Yochanan did just beforehand to save the Jewish people. Anyone?
You can't get this thing to go up.
Rabbi.
Yes. Please, Elena. Go for it.
Seizing the opportunity, based on Babylonian Talmud. The year 70 CE, Rome sent hundreds of thousands of troops to destroy Israel, burn the Holy Temple, massacre the Jews, crush Jewish political independence, and put an end to the existence of the Jewish people as a distinct nation. No more would the Jewish people live on their own land under their own government. After years of intensive battles, Vespasian, who would soon become the new Roman emperor, had successfully besieged Jerusalem and brought the Jews to total exhaustion. The city had fallen, people were dying in the streets, there was nothing to eat, and complete despair had overtaken the Jewish community. At any moment, conquered by the Roman legions and a temple would be destroyed. The situation was hopeless. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the prominent Jewish authority of the time, desired to meet Vespasian. So Abba Zikra, Rabbi Yochanan's nephew, suggested to him that he declare himself ill. After a few days, the news would spread that he died. His disciples would then smuggle him in a coffin out of the besieged city of Jerusalem to be buried outside of the city. Once outside of the city, he would be able to meet, soon to become emperor. And so he did. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai met Vespasian. During their conversation, during their conversation, the Jewish sage and laughed.
Yeah, I guess there's a word missing. I'm sorry. He left a powerful impression on the Roman general.
On the Roman general, to the extent that Vespasian agreed to fulfill any wish the rabbi had. Rabbi Yochanan made this request from Vespasian: 10 lay Yavnech v'chachamecha.
Right, good.
Yavne and its students. The city of Yavne was the home of the central Jewish educational institutions at the time. It was the place to which Jewish students would flock when they wanted to learn Torah and discover the moral vision of Judaism. Vespasian fulfilled his request. He went on to plunder Jerusalem, destroy the temple, cut down Jewish sovereignty in Israel. Only the yeshiva in Yavne was spared from the Roman merciless sword.
Right. Okay. All right. We can continue a little bit, but it's fine. So we get the story. Rabbi Yochanan acted dead They carried him in a coffin because they would let coffins leave the city that was under siege. And then there, he decided to immediately go to Vespasian, the emperor, and say, hey, I have a request for you. And he made a big impression. The details are not important for this right now, but he made a big impression on him. And then Vespasian said, okay, I'll agree to fulfill any wish you have. Now, let's stop there for a second and ask the question. Rabbi Yochanan, think about this. Put yourself in his shoes, okay? You just escaped. Illegally, you escaped the city. People thought you were dead, and now all of a sudden you're alive. You came out of the coffin after you had left the city, and you go and see Vespasian. For some reason, Vespasian didn't kill you for breaking the law, but he actually liked you, and he says, you know what, I like you so much, I'll let you have anything you want. Rabbi Yochanan has maybe one of the greatest dilemmas of history. Why? Because he has the opportunity to say to Vespasian, you're going to grant any wish I have. Why don't you free the entire nation? Stop the siege. But what does he do instead? He says, no, give me Yavne and its students. In other words, give me the city of Yavne and let me reestablish my educational institution to continue to teach Torah and the vision of Judaism to my students and carry that torch forward. Now, is that what you would have chosen? Think about this, really. I mean, I don't know. Wouldn't you have asked for the whole nation? You have this golden opportunity. He's going to fulfill any wish. Wouldn't you have asked for the whole nation to be saved? And if yes, why didn't Rabbi Yochanan ask that? Why is he so narrow-minded in a way, seemingly at least? I'm just out of curiosity. I mean, I can't see all of you, but just raise your hand if you would have asked for a much bigger request. Right? Okay, me too. Me too. Now, I probably would do the same. On the other hand, I understand Rabbi Yochanan, and I understand his dilemma. Why? Because he's saying to himself, well, I'm dealing with someone that's vicious, that's cruel, that's been besieging my city and caused thousands of Jews to die of starvation and diseases. So if I asked him to free my nation, maybe that will be too big of a request. And he'll say, you know what? I'm changing my mind. I'm not going to give you any. So he therefore decided to go for a smaller request.
Yep.
If I ask for something small, that he'll grant. If I ask for something too big, he might dismiss me and my request altogether.
Yep.
So he goes for something small. Now, I understand that dilemma, but you should know that until the day of his death, Rabbi Yochanan was torn by the decision he had made to ask only for Yavne, to the point here that the Babylonian Talmud says that years later, as Rabbi Yochanan lied dying on his deathbed, he looked back at his life and his heart gave him no rest. He felt profound guilt and shame. And he said to his students around him on his deathbed, I do not know where these angels are taking me. So when someone dies, he's surrounded by angels that will escort him to the next world, as Judaism believes. And he says, I don't know where they're going to take me. Are they going to take me to hell or are they going to take me to heaven? Maybe I made the mistake of my life that's going to cost me hell. What is hell and everything? That's a topic for a different day. Maybe we'll explore that next time if that's a topic that interests you. But he didn't know. I tore him. But I would dare say that whether you raised your hand before or not, whether you have asked for something bigger or not, I think Jewish history has agreed with Rabbi Yochanan and has proved Rabbi Yochanan right. Look at us today. Today we are here thanks to Rabbi Yochanan. We are studying thanks to Rabbi Yochanan. So in a way, he ensured the continuity of his people in the most safe and in the most resilient way.
Yeah.
And, yes, he could have maybe have asked for something bigger. Maybe Jewish history would have looked very different if he had. But at least we can rest assured that Rabbi Yochanan's decision had a lasting impact to the point that we are learning Torah today thanks to him. But what lesson am I drawing from this? And I think that's the third most important tool to take charge of our lives. Rabbi Yochanan, whether you know, how you see him after the story, that's your business, to put it very bluntly. But the way I see him here, and I think the way the Talmud portrays him, is that here is a man who, like so many others, was in quarantine, right? In the old city, not being able to leave, not being able to even, discuss anything with any type of negotiations with the Romans. They were coming to destroy you. And he says, it doesn't matter. I have to find an opportunity within this challenge. I have to find a glimmer of light within this darkness. And I'm going to find it, and I'll act upon it, even if I will risk my life doing so. And that's what he does.
Wow.
He had this brilliant startup, this brilliant idea, this out of the box, really out of the box thinking. And he said, I'm going to act that, be in a coffin, and go to Vespasian, yes, risking my life. He might just kill me for escaping the city in an illegal way. But I'm going to do that in any case for the Jewish people. He was the one who showed true leadership out of the thousands of people who could have done something in the city and not remained silent to their last day of life. Rabbi Yochanan stood up for himself and stood up for his people. He sees.
Wow.
Sorry.
I think that's the third lesson. That we also are in quarantine, very different quarantine, thank God, especially here in Arizona. And I believe so in Atlanta too. We're not in quarantine like they are, say, in Israel, where they live in tiny little apartments. And the guidelines there until recently were much stricter also than they were in Arizona. But we live in quarantine, in a comfortable quarantine, yet in quarantine. And we can say to ourselves, well, okay, we'll wait until this passes. Or we can say, I'm going to be a Rabbi Yochanan. And I'm going to find some glimmer of light in this darkness too. And I'm going to try and change the status quo. And I'm going to come out of this even better. And I'm going to ensure that my household becomes stronger and brighter through this quarantine. I'm going to change something. I'm going to seize the opportunities that maybe I never had. Maybe I'll use this time to develop a skill, a hobby. Maybe I'll use this time to, again, mend relationships and deepen my bond with my family members and with my friends. Maybe I'll use this time to meditate and try and develop myself, figure out what my calling is and actualize it from this point on. But we cannot allow ourselves to remain silent and sink in this silence, in this pain. Rabbi Yochanan didn't, and we should not either. And when we do so, we'll be saving also, not just ourselves, but generations to come. Like Rabbi Yochanan had this lasting impact, our seizing the opportunity, this third tool will also make a lasting impact on many, many people for many, many generations to come. I just want to share before we go to the conclusion, I want to share I was speaking to a friend in Israel who, like all of us, was quarantined, and he was telling me that it was the best thing that happened to him in life, this quarantine thing. And I asked him why. You know, he has a family, he has 6 children, can get hectic. He doesn't live like we live, as mentioned, in Arizona, in a comfortable home. And he said it's the best thing that happened in life, because what he did is he just, during this quarantine, he's had a startup idea in his mind for a very long time. And he finally used this quiet time of quarantine to develop this idea, pitch it to some VCs, venture capitalists. They loved it. He received funding for this idea, and he's now running with it, and he knows it already is starting to change his life. I was inspired by that. Why? Because, again, here's a man who said, I'm not going to allow just days to go by. You know, John Lennon famously said that life is what happens to us when we are busy making other plans.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't allow life just to happen to him. He took charge of that life. He said, I'm going to use this time to do something I've always wanted. I've always had this idea. I'm going to make a startup, and please God, he'll be even more successful than he started becoming the past few days and weeks. And I think we all have the ability to do so. So even when we're in quarantine, and even when times are tough. So to summarize, I would say again, to take charge of our lives, especially during these times, we need to heed to the 3 tools that come from this summer story of 2,000 years ago from Judaism sources. Number 1, again, being empathetic, engaged with society, knowing how to reach out to others, even when it might be hard, knowing how to work on love and bettering our relationship, not remaining indifferent to the chaos that is happening or to the evil that might be happening around us, but to take a stand for the truth and for goodness. That's number one. Number two, as we do so, engage ourselves in life, let's continue to have the grander vision of life, to be able to see the big picture, not to get stuck in the little trivialities of life, because yes, engaging ourselves in life invites many potential obstacles and hurdles. Some of them are very challenging and painful. You know, when I expose myself to people, for example, I become vulnerable. And that vulnerability can cause me to be sensitive to the way they look at me, to the insult they just gave me. But let's not get stuck in those trivialities. Let's use tool number two and continue to look at the big picture. And tool number three is, as we are engaging life and continue to look at the big picture, let's seize every opportunity that comes our way. Let's, even the challenges, create blessings. Just like my friend has mentioned, we can all do so also. And just to conclude, I want to conclude with this powerful midrash that speaks about the creation of the world and how the tree started to shiver, to become very afraid after it was created. Does anyone want to read this very interesting midrash?
Back to it.
Anyone?
I can't, I don't know, I lost the thing.
Yeah, it's right here, right in the screen, right here.
I'll read it.
Okay.
Please, Julie, go for it.
Okay. On the first Tuesday of creation, the earth and all that it contains emerged. When the trees observed iron, the trees began to shudder at the prospect of being felled by metal axe blades. The trees understood that against the mighty iron axe, they had little chance to survive. Upon hearing their laments, the iron retorted, "Why are you trembling? As long as you don't provide the wood for the axe's handles, you will remain immune from harm."
Right, a powerful midrash, very interesting midrash. But again, the tree started to shiver because they saw that, you know, the iron that comes from the ground will eventually chop them off. And God says to them, don't be worried about those axes, because they need a handle made of wood. And as long as you, tree, don't provide that wood, they won't be able to chop you off. It's a powerful midrash, but I think it speaks to something much deeper, to one of the great secrets of the human condition, that as long as we don't provide ammunition, so to speak, to our fears, to our insecurities, to our doubts, then we'll also be able to continue to grow and produce as good, healthy trees. But the minute we give in to the fears, insecurities, and to the doubts that come naturally from times like these, that's when the axes of life can start getting to us, and unfortunately, eventually also break us. And what the Midrash is saying, all in all, is that we are masters of our own fate, as long as we can follow those three tools. And as long as we can really continue to focus on all that which we can do, not all that which we cannot do, on all of our abilities, not on all of our inabilities, then we'll be able to produce great shade and many delicious foods for the world around us. And one of my favorite quotes that I've brought now many times from Man's Search of Meaning by Viktor Frankl, a best-selling book that sold over 25 million copies worldwide. And he says as follows: everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Viktor Frankl wrote those words as he witnessed the atrocities of Auschwitz. He himself, too, was a Holocaust survivor. And he wrote a book based on his experiences because he realized that what kept people alive at Auschwitz, what kept them going, what gave them hope for a brighter future was just this: their search for meaning, their knowledge that nothing, that everything can be taken from man but his attitude. And as a person might suffer, as a person might experience unfathomable pain, if his attitude is a positive one that is geared towards those three tools, then even the Nazis, no evil in the world will ever be able to get to him, and he'll come out triumphant, and his goodness will reverberate and create a ripple effect forever and ever. So friends, in conclusion, again, as I'm going to stop share now, but as we face these uncertain times, week in and week out, then I encourage everyone to, number one, be able to continue to engage yourselves in all that is good, to be those ambassadors of God in our world and stand for truth and for goodness. Number two, to continue to see the big picture, don't get stuck in all the trivialities of life. Be wise, as we said. And number three, to be able to seize every opportunity that comes our way, because life is full of them, even when we experience challenges, and create goodness for ourselves, for the world around us, and for generations to come.